Few people believe me when I tell this story, but I can't help but share it with you. Maybe someone has had something like this happen. And so I'll start. I was 17 years old at the time. My brother was taken into the army and the room we lived in was now completely mine. It was a very hot summer. Even at night it was very stuffy and I slept with the window open. One day I heard footsteps coming from above at night. Living on the top floor of a 9-story building, I was a little wary. I went to my parents' room and asked if they had heard footsteps upstairs or not. My parents were watching a movie on TV and didn't hear anything. Dad calmed him down and said that most likely the lovers had climbed onto the roof again to admire the stars. My father really convinced me and I calmly went on to sleep. On the second day, everything happened again. I heard footsteps on the roof again. The only thing that seemed strange to me was that the steps were not frequent and shuffling, as if the one who was on top did not lift his legs while walking. Putting aside the bad thoughts, I fell asleep. The main thing I wanted to tell you happened on the third day. As usual, I got ready to go to bed around midnight. After taking a cool shower, I opened the window in the room wide open and got into bed. At my feet was my dog, Rax, who followed me around all day, which was strange. He had never done this before. I was lying with my back to the window and the pleasant night air filled the room. There were footsteps on the roof again. It took about half an hour when Rax, who was lying with his muzzle to the window, started growling and it woke me up. I looked at the dog with sleepy eyes. He was lying motionless, but he was grinning angrily and growling, looking towards the open window. I turned my head and saw something with a long body coming down from the roof, leaning on the ledge with one hand, and the other thin hand with a huge brush was already in my room. I couldn't really see the head. I couldn't breathe from fear. I wanted to scream, but it didn't work out. Rex immediately jumped up and started barking. In an instant, the something disappeared outside the window. At the barking of the dog, the parents ran into the room. When they heard my story, they offered to spend the night in their room. The next night, my father was on shift, and my mother and I were alone. When I heard footsteps on the roof at the usual time, I ran to my mother in fright. She was standing in the middle of the room, and outside, something was scratching at the window. Within a month, the apartment was sold, and we moved to another area.
I decided to stay at home for the weekend. I ordered a pizza and thought about which of the two movies I've been wanting to watch for a long time to turn my attention to today. After making tea, I went out onto the balcony. Children were walking in the yard. It was a warm summer morning. My gaze caught, among other people in the yard, a man in a black long coat. It was my neighbor. I've noticed for a long time that he's a bit strange and unsociable. There was a neighbor, his name seemed to be Michael, under a tree in the shade. Soon a man came up to him and handed him something. As far as I could see, it looked like an envelope, which Michael quickly put in his coat pocket. After that, they shook hands and the neighbor went home. I was curious, because it looked like a spy meeting. Returning from the balcony, I went to the hallway and began to look through the peephole, expecting to see a neighbor. After a few minutes of waiting, I saw something interesting. The neighbor was walking on the ceiling. Passing near my door, he stopped and looked in my direction as if feeling that he was being watched, after which he quickly walked away in the opposite direction without going to his room. I didn't see him leave the house. I never saw him again. It seems to me that the neighbor will return one day to eliminate the witness of his secret. I'm very scared.
I'll tell you what happened to my sister recently. It started after my sister and her friend decided to go to a fortune teller. They asked about all sorts of girlish nonsense, about relationships with the opposite sex. I wasn't interested in it and I didn't really go into details. A few days later, when I woke up at night, I wanted to drink water. When I entered the kitchen and turned on the light, I saw my sister standing and looking out the window. Coming closer and asking her about what was happening, I did not receive an answer. Then I took her by the shoulders and started shaking her. She woke up, not understanding what she was doing in the kitchen. Frankly, my sister was not much shocked by herself. We went to bed next. The next night, my sister's sleepwalking began to progress. She was no longer looking out the window, but at me. Imagine a picture: I wake up in the middle of the night and see her standing motionless by my bed and looking at me with lifeless eyes. I almost shit myself from it. I didn't wake her up. Getting out of bed, I carefully escorted her to the room where she was sleeping and put her in bed, covering her with a blanket. I didn't really sleep until morning. Thoughts kept coming into my head about what happened to my sister, because this had never happened before. The third night was truly eerie. I was awakened by rustling and footsteps in the room. It was so dark that you couldn't see anything. Picking up the phone lying next to the pillow, he turned on the flashlight and lit up the room. My sister was writing some symbols on the wall with a marker. All these looked like letters and even formed into words. But these symbols had nothing in common with the letters that we find in various well-known alphabets. In wild horror, I got out of bed and turned on the light. The sister immediately fell to the floor and began to struggle in a fit. Somehow calming her down, I called an ambulance and it was decided to be hospitalized. I think these are the consequences of going to a fortune teller.
Ever since I was a child, the basement of our old family house had been the source of my nightmares. Hidden beneath creaky floorboards, it was a dark abyss where daylight feared to tread. The air was always cooler near its door, a silent whisper of the dread that lay beyond. My parents warned me never to venture down, but it wasn't their admonitions that kept me away. It was the noises, unearthly, inexplicable sounds that seemed to crawl up the stairs and slip beneath my door at night. Whispers, groans, and something that sounded like scratching against the walls. As a child, I imagined a creature from the depths of horror tales living in our basement. Years passed, and the fear that had gripped my childhood eventually faded into an uneasy truce with the unknown. I moved away for college, then work, leaving behind the house and its basement specter. Yet, the death of my father and the inevitable return to my childhood home to settle affairs brought me face to face with the past. The house was as I remembered, but now it seemed smaller, less imposing except for the basement door, which stood as a dark reminder of my once paralyzing fear. I decided it was time to confront the monster of my childhood. One evening, armed with a flashlight and a resolve forged from years of curiosity and a desire to face my fears, I opened the basement door. The familiar chill greeted me, a cold breath from the bowels of the house. The stairs groaned under my weight, a symphony of protest as I descended into the darkness. The beam of my flashlight cut through the shadows, revealing a basement cluttered with memories, boxes of old photographs, furniture covered in sheets, and forgotten toys. But it was the far corner of the basement that drew my attention, where the noises seemed to originate. As I approached, heart pounding, the air grew colder, denser, as if filled with the breath of something unseen. Then, amidst the clutter, I saw it a small, makeshift habitat hidden behind old furniture. Within, a creature unlike any I had imagined. It was small, frail, its body covered in patches of fur, eyes that reflected a deep intelligence, and, perhaps, sadness. It recoiled from the light, a hiss escaping its thin lips. I realized then that this creature was no monster, Overcome with a mixture of relief and compassion, I began to leave food and water for it, creating a bond that transcended fear. When it came time to sell the house, I found myself at a crossroads. The basement creature, once the monster of my nightmares, had become a symbol of my childhood's misunderstood fears.
A recently married couple were on a long road trip through the heart of the United States. One night it was raining hard and the headlights of their car flashed across a bearded man on the side of the road hitchhiking. Not usually one for picking up hitchhikers, the husband stopped and pulled over to offer the guy a lift because the weather was so bad. The man thanked the husband and climbed in the back of the car. He seemed agitated and edgy, barely speaking a word for the whole journey. Eventually, the couple dropped him off where he asked. At a crossroads, the rain was still coming down in sheets. The couple drove on for a good while and, to pass the time, the husband turned on the radio. The couple heard a news report about an escaped lunatic, considered very dangerous, who should not be approached under any circumstances. The description matched the hitchhiker and the couple looked at each other, clearly shocked, but happy nothing bad had occurred. Just then the car gave out, and no amount of keying the ignition would make it start again. The husband tells his wife to stay in the car while he sets off through the rain to try and get help. The woman locks the doors and wants to listen to the radio, but the car battery seems dead. Eventually she dozes off. A while later, she wakes up seeing flashing police lights through the water coming down the windshield and a voice through a loudspeaker. "Lady, open the door. Get out of the car and run towards us as fast as you can. Do it now." The woman is confused, but she gets out of the car with her hands above her head. "Run and don't look back," orders the police officer. But the woman is curious and turns. In the flashing blue lights of the police car and illuminated by flashes of lightning, she sees the top of the car where the hitchhiker with a machete is hacking at the dismembered corpse of her husband. Blood is streaming down the sides of the car. She screams and faints as a flurry of gunshots ring out.
A 15-year-old girl lived with her father in a small house in the suburbs. Since her mother died, her father has become everything to her. They had a great relationship. They loved each other very much. One morning, the girl's father told her that he was going on a business trip and would arrive home very late at night. Having said that, he kissed her on the forehead, grabbed his briefcase, and ran out of the house. Later that day, when the girl returned home from school, she did her homework and sat down to watch TV. By midnight, her father had not returned yet, so she decided to go to bed. She had a dream. She was standing on the edge of a busy highway. Cars and trucks were passing by at an alarming rate. She looked across the highway and saw a familiar figure. It was her father. He had his hands near his mouth and seemed to be shouting something at her, but she couldn't make out the words. When the hum of the cars died down, she strained her ears. There was sadness in his father's eyes. He was desperately trying to tell her something. She could barely make out the words. "Don't open the door." Suddenly, the girl woke up to strange noises. Someone was knocking on the door loudly and insistently. She jumped out of bed and put on her slippers and ran to the door. Looking through the peephole, she saw her father's face. He was looking right at her. The doorbell rang insistently. "Wait, I'll open it now." "Stop it," she screamed. She threw back the bolt and was about to open the door, but stopped at the last moment. She looked through the peephole at her father. There was something wrong with his expression. His eyes were wide open. He looked scared. She put the bolt back in place. "Dad," she shouted. "Did you forget the keys?" Ding, ding, ding. "Dad, answer me." Ding, ding, ding. "Dad, please, I need you to answer me." Ding, ding, ding. "Is there someone there with you?" Ding, ding, ding. "Why don't you answer?" Ding, ding, ding. "I'm not opening the door until you answer me." The doorbell rang and rang, but her father, for some unknown reason, did not answer her. The girl spent the rest of the night huddled helplessly in the corner of the hallway and listening to the incessant doorbells. This went on for about an hour, then the girl fell into oblivion. At dawn, she woke up and realized that the doorbell was no longer ringing. She crept up to the door and looked through the peephole again. Her father was still standing there, looking right at her. She carefully opened the door, and what she saw filled her with unimaginable horror. Her father's severed head was nailed to the door at eye level. There was a note attached to the doorbell. It said, "Smart girl."
There was a girl named Emily who lived in one city. One day, she threw a party and invited what she thought were her best friends. There was an old cemetery not far from her house. One of Emily's friends told a legend that said there was a witch's grave in the cemetery. Also, there were rumors that whoever stood on this grave at midnight, the witch would drag him straight to hell. Emily just burst out laughing and said that it was all a child's invention. The boy who told this story claimed that everything was exactly as the legend says, and in order not to look like a loser in the eyes of friends, he suggested that Emily go to the grave herself at midnight and check. Emily, of course, agreed because she didn't want to seem like a coward to everyone. And now it was midnight. Emily and her friends were standing at the cemetery gate. To prove that Emily was really at the witch's grave, the guys gave her a knife, which she had to stick into the grave, and then they would come and look. Emily took the knife with ostentatious bravery and went into the depths of the cemetery. She was very afraid and was already not happy that she had got involved in this, but she was not going to back down, because everyone would think that she had chickened out. And now it was midnight. Emily and her friends were standing at the cemetery gate. To prove that Emily was really at the witch's grave, the guys gave her a knife, which she had to stick into the grave, and then they would come and look. When friends came running to Emily's scream, they saw the dead body of the girl lying on the witch's grave. The hem of her dress was nailed to the ground with a knife. She had nailed herself with it and did not notice. Thinking that she was being held by a witch, her heart couldn't stand it. That's how Emily's party ended.
I work as a security guard at the mall. Work shifts often fall out at night, and for me these are the easiest days. I sit watching movies on my laptop and periodically look at the monitors of CCTV cameras. But the last night forced me to quit. As always, I arrived at 10 o'clock to take over the shift. My partner got sick and I had to work alone. At that time, the trading halls and entertainment areas finished work, and only the cleaners remained, but even those had already gone home by midnight. As usual, I started the movie, brewed strong tea and sat down in an easy chair. It took about an hour when on one of the monitors I noticed a shadow on the white floor of the corridor, which was cast by a mannequin from a clothing store. The strange thing was that the shadow moved slightly to the right and left, as if the lighting angle was changing, but the rest of the shadows in the room were static. It occurred to me that someone was shining a flashlight on the mannequin, and this already required verification. When I went down to the first floor and looked around, I didn't find anything suspicious. Perhaps it was just a distortion of the image, and I went to the security room quite calmly. Upon arrival, looking at the monitor, I noticed that the same mannequin seemed to turn its head and stare directly at the camera. I couldn't believe that such a thing was even possible. I had to go down to the ground floor again to clear everything up for myself. Maybe it was someone's joke, but only I knew for sure that I was alone in the mall. The mannequin was fine, and after wandering the corridors for a while, he returned to his workplace. For a while everything went without incident, and I calmly continued to watch the movie, occasionally glancing at the monitor with the dummy. Everything was fine. I do not know how to explain it, but when I looked at the monitor again, the dummy was not there. Then I was scared. There was a knock on the door. Fortunately, it was locked and had a peephole. Looking through the peephole, I saw a mannequin standing outside the door with a nasty painted smile and eyes in the form of black diamonds. Everything inside me cringed with horror, and it became difficult to breathe. "Let me in." Suddenly, there was a sound outside the door. The voice was unnaturally emotionless and intimidating. Pressing myself against the wall opposite the door, I began to make the sign of the cross over myself, after which there was a scream and two last blows on the door followed. The monitors turned off for a few seconds, and when they turned on, the mannequin was already in its place in the store. I didn't go out until morning. After I was replaced by another guard, I went and wrote a letter of resignation without explaining the reasons.
I'm 17 years old, a football and basketball star, pretty much the coolest guy on this planet. Never smoked a cigarette, never had a sip of alcohol so far. My parents praise me over my younger brother, who is tormented in my shadow of greatness, which I so often spout about on my Instagram page. He's into drugs. Tonight I'm texting this super sexy chick from an online site I'm trying out, being 17 and all. I type to her, "What's going on? Boobtron." A typing bubble appears. Nothing much. "Babe, where do you live?" I am both alarmed and severely turned on, so I type in my address. I look over my shoulder on my bed to listen for anyone still awake in my house. "I'll see you soon," she wrote back. I walk across the hall from my room and open my younger brother's door. I see he's asleep, and instead of telling him, I close his door and turn on a fan in the hall, so he doesn't hear me. A knock on the door. I panic that my parents hear the knock as I run downstairs and open the door. A 6'7" man with a bag over his head grabs me off my feet and closes the door behind me, carrying me in his arm to the black van he parked in front of the house. I screamed as he opened the trunk and threw me in before padlocking it and running into his driver's seat. I hear the engine roar as I am thrown against the back door of the van, landing on my now broken and half arm. I scream in agony as I look ahead through the police wire between the front seat and the trunk. The man eventually stopped the vehicle deep in the forest, pulling out a gun before opening the trunk. He grabs my broken arm and forces it behind my back, and he handcuffs me. I begin to panic and kick my legs. He smashes his gun on my head, and I let out a scream of pain. I lay still as he duct tapes my legs together at the ankle. He tapes my mouth over last and leans me against the side of the trunk. He pulls out this generator-looking contraption from his passenger seat with a vacuum tube hosing into his hand, where a massive needle an inch wide is in his hand. "You've never drank before, right?" he asked me. He must have seen my Instagram. "No, sir. Never." I plead through my tape and shake my head. "Good, you're of the perfect breed and age I need." He stabs me in the stomach and starts the machine. I see immediately my blood filling the tub and driving into the machine. I feel as my organs are pulled through the tight tube. I scream in horrible pain as I am hollowed out. The machine gets stuck on what feels like one of my kidneys. He snips the vein holding it to my body as the machine continues sucking the life out of me. I stop crying as he turns off the machine and drags me out of the van. I am empty, so little blood left. I somehow feel my head being dragged across the dirt road as he lifts up my light-skinned body up onto a metal railing. I hear water washing below me. I can barely hear my heart beat or feel anything. He pushes me off the railing, and a few seconds later I crash into the river below, where I sink to the peaceful floor.
When I was little, I often stayed with my grandmother. My cousins and sisters, of whom there were 7, also came to visit her. We had fun with this big company. One day, when we were playing hide and seek, I saw something that I remembered for the rest of my life, but about everything in order. My grandmother Sarah has an old, but rather large house. There are a lot of rooms, and we always liked it, as there was enough space for all the grandchildren. One evening, when all my brothers and sisters were visiting my grandmother, we decided to play hide and seek. I was 8 years old then. At first, the lot fell to me to look for. I counted to 10 and went to look for it. I found them all pretty quickly, and now John had to look for them. While he was counting to 10 with his face to the wall, I quickly crawled under the bed. I lay there for an unexpectedly long time. I heard that my older brother John had already found someone in the neighboring rooms. I had to wait for them to find me. Deciding to look out from under the bed a little, I crawled to the edge and looked at the room flooded with the rays of the setting sun. There was no one in it for a while, but soon the closet door opened and a hunchbacked and furry demon came out. He was not very tall and had hooves on his feet. It had a goat's head, but the horns were bent forward. This demon jumped across the room into jumps and jumped out the open window. I quickly got out from under the bed and ran to the guys to tell them about it. After that, we all went and told Grandma that I had seen the devil, but Baba Sarah quickly sent us to bed and asked us not to fool her with inventions, but I know for sure that it did not seem to me.